Well, morning, everybody, and nice to be with you again. Welcome back to those of you who were with us on Tuesday. We're here this morning now to look at the second module of getting ready to teach French, German, and Spanish for the international GCSE Pearson languages. So here we go. In terms of our agenda for today, well, we'll do a little bit the welcome for Pearson. We're going to have a refresher, really, of the overview of the assessment objectives, the requirements for the assessment. And then we're going to look at each of the four components, each of the papers. And of course, you'll remember that reading and writing are together on the same paper, but we still have those four skills that we need to prepare the students to be able to deal with. As we did on Tuesday, if you have questions that you'd particularly like to ask, do please put those into the Q&A, and I will answer those questions as best I can towards the end of the session. I'm presenting on my own today, so I'm rather than try to monitor the Q&A and the chat and everything all at the same time, I'm going to present the material and we'll pick up on any questions that you might like to ask towards the end. So do please be aware of that, and if I don't appear to notice your question in the chat, I will come to it, but we'd like to try and do those things at the end. In terms of our aims and objectives today, we're looking at understanding the assessment objectives, we're looking at understanding the different question types, understanding the mark schemes in more detail. We're going to sort of practice using the mark schemes. We're going to look at some exemplar work, and we're going to learn about the support provided by Pearson around assessment and exemplars. Now, most of the material that we look at today is material in French, but you will be able to find the same material for Spanish and German via the website. In the session that we have this morning, I'm going to talk about the general principles, really. So if you're not a French teacher or you don't know French well, that will be absolutely fine. It won't matter because the same material in terms of commentary will be available in Spanish and German. But we have everybody together today, so we're going to look in French, but I will talk you through the details so that you understand, and you'll be able to find equivalent material for Spanish and German via the website. So we already did the polls, and I'm going to, if you excuse me, we won't do that again. I think we have the same group of people, so we know that we have a new to Pearson group, and we also have some people who are new to teaching, and we also knew that we had all of the three languages represented. So we also talked on Tuesday, and again, I'll go through these things quite quickly about the sort of welcome to Pearson, and we said that we are the largest awarding organisation in the UK. It's a company with a heritage that stretches back over 150 years now. We are providing qualifications to 3.5 million students worldwide every year. We partner with 6,500 schools and colleges globally, and over 10 million exam scripts are marked on behalf of the UK Department for Education each year, and we operate in 70 countries. So it's a truly global organisation, and obviously with languages, we need to be at the heart of that because we are innately global in terms of what we do. Now, let's have a think about the things that we're here to do today. We're here to think about the overview of the assessment requirements, first of all, and then we'll look at the detail, really, of each of the exam papers. So a reminder then of the four assessment objectives and the way those things are weighted in the specification. So assessment objective 1 is to understand and respond in writing to spoken language. So that's listening comprehension. Okay, they're spoken language and they're answering questions by ticking boxes or writing answers. So that's assessment objective 1. They're responding in writing. Assessment objective 2 is communicating in writing using register appropriate to the situation, showing knowledge of a range of vocabulary in common use and of the grammar and structures prescribed in the specification, and also using them accurately. So that's writing. Assessment objective 3 is understand and respond in writing to written language. So that's reading, isn't it? So that's they read written language and they understand and respond in the same way that we saw with listening. And assessment objective 4 is about speech, is about the productive skills. So 1 and 3 are receptive skills, and 2 and 4 are productive skills. And for the qualification that we're dealing with, there isn't any overlap of those skills. We're not ever going to ask them to read a passage and then write a response to it. Okay, so there's no overlap of any of those skills. They're each assessed individually. And you'll remember, if you were with us on Tuesday, or if you weren't and you've yet to watch the recording, that each of the 4 assessment objectives is tested across 3 papers. So paper 1 is the listening comprehension paper, and that's just worth 25%, and that's a paper that's taken on its own. But paper 2 covers reading and writing. But look, each of those assessment objectives is assessed separately. So the first half is reading, the second half is writing, but they're not assessed jointly, if you see what I mean. So as I said, we do reading comprehension first, and then we do writing. And paper 3 is the speaking test, and the speaking test again is 25%. So each of the assessment objectives is worth 25%, but they're covered over 3 papers. Now, the specifications have a minimum core vocabulary list, and so you'll find that at the end of your specification, and that's the guide really to the starting point for the vocabulary that you need to be making sure your students are able to use and understand. So that helps you to plan your scheme of work for your students. And questions targeted at grades 1 to 5 are based on this vocabulary list, although these questions may include some unfamiliar vocabulary. So keep in mind that at the beginning of the reading and listening paper in particular, the questions will work very much around that vocabulary. But obviously that vocabulary is a minimum, it isn't a ceiling, if you know. So I think we would expect students to perhaps have some knowledge of vocabulary beyond the list. And the vocabulary is listed also under different topics and different subtopics. So, you know, you can find those things in Appendix 1 of the specification, and you've got the sort of example there. So we've also produced that sort of vocabulary with an indication of the part of speech. So whether it's a feminine noun, or whether it's a verb, whether it's an adjective, adverb, etc. And so that vocabulary will appear for you. And the vocabulary is sorted alphabetically. So as you're teaching each topic, it's a good idea to begin by sort of working and gathering that vocabulary, making sure that your students are aware of it as well, and that they're using that vocabulary. But the vocabulary shouldn't necessarily limit what you do. It's a starting point. It's a useful list that will be a useful thing for them to be able to know and deal with, but it isn't a definitive list. Okay, so we're going to have a look now at paper 1, and we're going to think about the listening part of the paper. So let's just sort of recap, if you like, some of the information that we gave on Tuesday about the requirements for the listening paper. So the listening paper is worth 40 marks. It's a 30-minute paper, and there's 5 minutes of reading time. You as the teacher or the person invigilating the exam doesn't need to do anything. You just start the recording and it plays, and then it stops. So you don't need to do any pausing or anything like that. And it's about 30 minutes long, and that might vary a little bit from sort of 29 to 31 minutes, because obviously in certain series the recording might be a tiny bit longer, but it will be consistently around that 30-minute mark. But the students are given 5 minutes of reading time to prepare themselves for what they need to do in that listening paper. So as we mentioned, I think on Tuesday, one of the things that you can usefully be doing is training your students in how to use that 5 minutes reading time effectively. And my sort of best advice is that reading time shouldn't be totally passive. It should be active. So they should know with their highlighter or their pen the words they're going to underline, the things that they're going to look at. We will talk in a moment when we look at the text and task types at the elements of distraction that students may need to use. So training them to use that 5 minutes is a useful strategic thing. In terms of the assessment, there are 7 recorded extracts in the spoken target language, and there's an incline of difficulty throughout the paper. So that means that it starts off with the easiest task types and also the easiest content, and then it moves through and becomes progressively more difficult. And that's true of really of all of the papers. Certainly in paper 2, the reading starts with the easiest bit and moves to the most difficult, and then the writing goes back and through we go. And it's also true of the speaking. So we'll see that pattern as we go through the papers during the session today. Now, the task types include multiple choice, multiple matching, note-taking, table completion, and gap fill questions. And we're going to have a look at some examples of each of those task types, I think, in a moment or two, so you will be aware of those task types. One of the things that's also important for you to be aware of, particularly if you're new to Pearson, is that the task types will be consistent. So the sample assessment material, which is published on the website, is the design, it's the model for all future assessments. And so those task types, if question 2 is a multiple choice question, question 2 will always be a multiple choice question. And your students shouldn't expect ever to find a new task type or anything that they hadn't dealt with before. And that's a really important thing for your students to understand, because if you are training them with particular strategies for particular tasks all the way through, that's a really useful thing for your students to understand, that they can expect that the paper will work in that way. Okay, so that consistency is a key feature. So let's have a look through, and we're going to have a look through at some of the different sort of task types. We have examples in different languages as we go through, but I think there will be a predominance of French. If you're not, this is a Spanish one, so if you're not a Spanish speaker, I'll just kind of explain to you. So this is question 4, for example. So this is an example of an objective question. We have the names of the people, the 6 people that you're going to hear speak down that left-hand column, and there's also an example. And what the students need to decide is whether each of those people has a positive opinion, a negative opinion, or a mixed, both positive and negative opinion. And the students, notice, are given a title, in this case, hacer deporte, so doing sport. So they know what they're going to hear those people talk about, and they need to decide whether those opinions are positive, negative, or positive and negative. Okay, so that's an example of what we would call an objective question. That's where you have to tick a box or put a cross in a box in this case. So that was one of the question types, the sort of objective question type. If we look now at, and let me go back for a moment. So what I was saying in terms of consistency, that is a question 4, and for French, Spanish, and German, it will be the same question type. And you could always expect that at question 4, it will be that question type. So you're preparing your students to be able to deal with that question type. And obviously, as you were teaching them, you would be teaching them, how can positive opinions, how could we identify positive opinions, how could we identify negative opinions, and then also, are we listening to both? Okay, so when we're listening to both, we might be hearing words like but and however and nevertheless, or in spite of that. Okay, so sometimes we may need to do those things, but you would prepare your students with those strategies for that particular question. Okay. If we look at question 6 now, we have a different question type, and this is now we're kind of doing a German example here, but what candidates would need to do is to write the correct letter for the correct word that fits into the gap, which is where the 3 dots are in those 6 questions. Again, they're given an example, and notice that the example G is crossed out. So what strategy could their students apply in their 5 minutes of preparation time here? Well, what they could do is that they could go through that list A to M and just work out, in terms of the grammar, in terms of the part of speech, which are the possible words that could fit in terms of grammar and sense in each of those A to F. And maybe, they write B and E against one of the words, so that they're sort of starting to kind of think about which are the possibles, and they write only in the box with the letters, but obviously they do have some time before the exam to get themselves prepared. So prepare them not just to read that passively, but also to be active in working out which words could possibly fit in the spaces, identifying the parts of speech, and so on. Now, question 7 is a question where candidates are going to need to produce a few words in French, Spanish, or German. So they're told here that the text is about helping at home. Listen to the conversation and note down the details in French. It's not necessary to write in full sentences. And this is important too. Now, we don't mind how students answer as long as they answer. And so we're not concerned if it is that they can transcribe just what they hear and they can do it in a recognizable way, that's fine. But actually their answers should be as small and as minimal as we can possibly make them. They're given that little bit of space to write, and they shouldn't probably exceed the amount of space that they're given. And they listen to the conversation, and they're going to hear a set of positive aspects and a set of negative aspects. So a set of opinions that they're going to hear. So the opinion of the young people about helping at home, and the argument about for for helping at home. Okay, and those are in those categories they need to answer and in note form. Sometimes we have questions as well about how if the student spells incorrectly in French, will they still get the mark? And the examiners will, provided what the student has written is accurate enough for an examiner to understand their intended answer, then yes, we're not marking here for the quality of their French, Spanish, or German. It needs to be good enough for the examiner to understand, but for example, in French, we're not too concerned if they've put a double letter where we don't need a double letter, or they've put a single letter where we do need a double letter. Provided communication is achieved, the mark will be given. Okay. Now, I'm going to just sort of say a few things about examiner reports now, having looked at the kind of question types that we might see in the listening paper. So examiner reports for each paper are produced every series, and they're really useful documents because they're written by the examiner who's responsible for the paper. So this will be the person who has the best overview of the performance of all of the candidates. And what they do is that they give you some exemplars and they give tips as well from the examiner. So those are things that you can use as you train your students to deal with the papers, as you teach them the strategies. And they're also things that you can share with your students. And these reports, you can find them on the website for this year's exams and also for previous year's exams. So do take the time really to do that bit of research and to read through those examiner reports, because they do really provide you with very valuable information. And this sort of gives you and we won't spend time to read the whole thing, but this gives you an example from the 2023 examiner report on French on question 7. And that was that question, if you remember, with the positive and negative attitudes. And as you will just see from that, there's an awful lot of detailed information given. And this is the sort of thing that you can use to help you refine your teaching, help you to teach your students. So it doesn't just describe the candidate's performance. It also shows that there are alternative ways to gain the marks, and so on. And I think that's kind of quite important. On that, and you see in the middle, the principal examiner says another route to the mark was. This brings me to another point really about the mark schemes, which we may have a look in a moment. But there is never just one way to answer those questions where candidates have to write something. And so examiners always, and it's very much the Pearson approach, that we adopt positive marking. So what we're looking for is whether the candidate has understood and whether comprehension is achieved. And as long as comprehension is achieved, we are quite happy to give the mark. So not every possible correct way to express an answer is ever going to be included on the mark scheme. So as you're marking and assessing your students, we don't need the exact wording from the published mark scheme. If you judge that your student in that mock exam has understood, but they've just expressed their answer in a slightly different way, providing comprehension is achieved, the mark can be given. So we're going to give you just a few moments now to have a look in the packs, and you should see the mark scheme and examiner reports for the 2023 series, and you need to take a moment or two to have a look at those materials, and if you have any comments or anything in the chat, then we can deal with those things. So we'll just give you a moment or two to reflect. I don't think we even need to take 5 minutes, but I just wanted to give you a moment to make sure that you can have a look at those things. Seems people can't find the pack. No matter, everybody. The examiner's report will be available on the website, and we'll get those things over to you after the event today. So apologies if that's not available to you. Let's move on, and we'll look through. I think all of those things can be sort of dealt with afterwards. I think we've made the point really about the examiner's reports. Okay. Yeah. We'll move on. Don't worry. We'll get those things to you after the event today. I think I want to look at the detail really, because rather than give you silent time to read anyway. Right, let's have a look. So we've talked about listening, and I want to talk to you about reading now and the reading paper. So in terms of the requirements and assessments, let's have again a look at the big picture. The reading paper is a reading and writing paper is at paper 2. There are 40 marks for each of the 2 sections. The paper lasts an hour and 45 minutes. So in terms of the structure of the paper, there are 5 reading passages in the target language. 1 text is taken from a literary source, and question 4 requires some note taking from the text. So that's the reading part. And then there are 3 writing and grammar questions. Well, 2 writing and 1 grammar. So question 6 is a 75 to 80 word task, and question 7 is 130 to 150 word task. I don't know why we've got 80 to 75, but anyway, it's within that range, 75 to 80. And the question 8 is a grammar-based task, which requires students to fill in the correct form of a noun, of an adjective, apologies, or verb within the passage that they read. So we'll have a look at that when we get there. So just sort of now thinking about some of the question types and giving you an idea about some of the question types. So question 3 then is going to be an objective question. Notice candidates are given this title, so they know what they're reading about. They're going to read the comments from 3 different people. And this is a Spanish example here. And they're also given a little bit more information. How are you thinking of celebrating your birthday? So they're provided with context. Each of the 3 people say what they want to say. And then the task is that they have to connect each of those summative comments, summary comments, with what somebody says. Okay, and they're given an example. So I am going to rent a house. And who said that? Well, that was Alvaro. Okay. And so they choose in each case one person who said each of those things. Okay. So now coming back to the instruction, notice that you are told put a cross in the 8 correct boxes. Be careful. It's possible that some statements might have more than one cross or none at all. So just in terms of strategy with your students, just make sure that always they look at the number of marks at the bottom. What we see is that we've got A to G. So we've got 7 possible statements. We could expect some of those statements might be used twice and some might not be used at all. Okay. So D, for example, I'm going to spend time in the car. Maybe nobody says anything about that, so we don't put a cross there. But in E, for example, I'm going to eat outdoors. Maybe 2 people talk about that, and you could put 2 crosses. So important just to remind candidates to count 8 crosses. They need to have marked 8 boxes, and they don't count the example. Of course, the example is just done for them. So it's the example plus 8 boxes. Just make sure again that your students are familiar with the task type. But what I can tell you is that you can consistently expect that question 3 will always be that kind of task. It will always be that task type. And so that's helpful for you in training your students with their approach to this. But what we don't want any of them to do is to struggle with the technical aspect of following the instructions. So I can't stress enough that it is important that your students follow the instructions there, that they're aware that maybe some questions, some of those don't need a cross at all, and some may have 2. And if we look back also, it says more than 1 cross. I don't think we very often get 3, but it is also possible. So follow the instructions carefully. So if we have a look at question 4, and we see it's a German text now, so this is picking up the level of demand, and we're also seeing that this is a literary text. So candidates can expect that they will deal with a short literary text. That will be a text that is adapted and abridged, so it's made from the original novel, but it will actually also be brought into line with the level of language for international GCSE. So very often simplified, very often shortened, very often a text that's taken from different parts of a particular chapter. So in terms of developing students' ability with these texts, there are lots of these texts available. The national GCSE for England has literary texts on those papers as well. So they're quite a good source of texts for you to practice with. And of course, there are examples in the textbook. The students need to be aware that the literary text will have literary features, and you can see, for example, we've got things like we've got speech happening in there, we've got dialogue happening, and it might also have literary features like metaphors, similes, that kind of thing. So although it's testing reading, it's also important that they understand that there will be in this a sense of narrative, that maybe there's something that's happened before and will happen afterwards, that there are some characters and that those characters may speak. And so they need practice with the kind of language that they might use there. And asks or asked Victoria well. Of course, sometimes we will see that those verbs that we think are very familiar because we've read lots of literature are not so familiar in those forms that the students might find in a literary text. That's not a verb form that students use very much in productive language. So just worth mentioning those things. Sometimes, however, these literary texts can provide quite good modelling for things that you might want your students to do when they do the writing. And so sometimes there isn't anything wrong with using a little bit of dialogue in their writing or a bit of reported speech, anything like that. So do make sure you kind of point out the features of the texts that are appearing in really throughout the reading paper. It's not just necessarily reading for comprehension, but it's also using those things as models for productive language. And that's quite a useful thing for students to be able to do. And those are kind of activities which really sort of enable your students to read better, but also to write better. So here, of course, the text, it's a gap fill type question. So the candidates need to write in a word or possibly a very short phrase, but in German, just to fill those gaps or to kind of make those notes. Okay. So we are looking only for notes to be made. Okay, make notes. And so we notice that we've got those sort of headings in G, Victoria's idea. And so we just want a very, very short response to that in note form. Again, the quality of the written language is not marked for accuracy here. So provided it's understandable, comprehensible, that's absolutely fine. Notice as well that some of those questions are two-part question. So, you know, Maximilian activities in the mornings. So we want morning activities. And again, that needs to be pointed out to students. Okay, so where we've got the and, we're looking for two things. And I think again, just for students to be aware that we are only looking for notes, but what they write needs to be clear and unambiguous. So sometimes if the answer was goes to the market, if they've read in the text, I go to the market might not be totally unambiguous, because here we're sort of moving into third person. So just make sure that what they write is clear and unambiguous, but very short. And it's useful as well with students to use the mark scheme to exemplify this activity and to show them how simple and straightforward it is and how concise they should aim to be. Okay, now we're going to move on. We're going to have a look at question 5 now, and this is a French example. You will see again that the text now is increasing in difficulty. You see, even if you're not a French specialist, that the sentences are extending. We see a greater range of connectives, greater range of vocabulary, and those sort of subordinate clauses, greater number of subordinate clauses will start to appear in those. So the meaning, the text is now starting to be extended, but it gives you a good idea of, again, the sort of level that students might want to look to be achieving in their writing, and using some of those things to sort of help them develop their own style when they come into writing, and particularly on the longer writing task. And here, in response to this text, we're asking students to answer free response questions. So they actually have to write their answer in French. So making sure always as you're teaching them that they are focusing clearly on the interrogatives, that they know those interrogatives and that they know the interrogative forms. And also notice that some of those questions are worth 2 marks, and they are told in each case give 2 details, and some of them are only worth 1 mark. They're given plenty of space to write, but actually, as you look at the mark scheme and look at the mark scheme with your students, we shouldn't really need to fill that space. So the answers can be very short and very concise, and training your students to answer concisely is a really useful thing, again, to be doing with that text. And again, we don't need to have totally correct language, provided their intended answer is clear and robustly demonstrates that they've understood. The important thing is this is a comprehension activity, and we're only interested in making sure that they have understood. So if there's good evidence that they've understood, they can achieve those marks. When we move on to the writing section later on paper 2, of course, yes, we then need to see accuracy and range of language, and we are testing them on their productive language. But this is a receptive skills task, and so we are not deducting any marks if the French, Spanish, or German is spelled incorrectly, provided it's clear to the person reading it what the candidate intends to say. And so again, that positive marking approach. And so we see a little bit more again of those questions. And you also notice that variation of interrogatives as well. So, you know, where it says pourquoi, there, why, obviously students need to be writing a reason. In G, we see how, and so we're looking for a manner. And so, again, this is the sort of thing that we might train students to be looking for in text to deal with those particular interrogatives that the question flags. So to enable them to find the section in the text where the questions are. Now, in all of these questions and also on the listening, the answers to the questions will come in order, in the same order that they appear in the text. So as they read through the text as well, it's quite a useful thing just for them maybe to have the strategy of just marking where the answer to question E came, and then if they read through and they find the answer to question G, but they can't quite be sure about the answer to question F, they would locate the area of the text where that answer should come from. And particularly with these 2-mark questions, you can advise students that actually, if they've found the answer, found one detail, but they're not too sure about the next one, a useful strategy is to try to read on in the text, find the answer to question G, and then you'll start to locate where that answer is. And that can just help clarify their thinking. So they should understand that the questions will go in the order in which the information appears in the text. Okay. Now, for session 5, paper 2, we're going to just have a look now at the aspects of the writing paper, and we're going to go through that. And so we've talked about reading, we've talked about listening, so we've talked about those receptive skills, and there are many things in common between the receptive skills and the approaches to assessment. And we're now going to have a look at the writing section, but this continues on in paper 2. So we mentioned reading, that was 40 marks. Writing is also 40 marks. The duration of the paper is also important. It's 1 hour and 45 minutes. In fact, students are probably going to need a bit more time to write than they are to read. So again, giving them some practice in managing their time here is important. 1 hour and 45 minutes for students aged 16 in this day and age is quite a long time. It's quite a long period of assessment, and they've got a lot to do. So probably they should spend about 45 minutes on the reading section and about 1 hour on the writing, because the writing does require some planning. There's a little bit more to do for those marks. So again, as you're sort of practicing, make sure that they are able to do things within a certain amount of time. And as you're practicing exam technique in class, clearly some timed activities and making sure that they are good at managing that time is really important, because the question 7 and question 8, the grammar task, by that point in the exam, they're starting to get tired, and they also need to be really very squarely focused on what it is they're doing in that time. So make sure they do manage their time effectively. So let's have a look then. So question 6, and this is well, here we're told 60 to 75 words. So I think perhaps the information there was so 60 to 75 words. Write a response about 60 to 75 words in French on the subject of your family. You should use all the words above. Okay, so a couple of things that we need to say about this question then. They're given a topic, so the subject is the family, and they're told, write an answer about 60 to 75 words in French on the subject of your family. Now, the word count, we don't mind if they write more, but my advice as an examiner over the years is that candidates who write too much or too little tend to penalize themselves, because if they write too much, they're going to make more mistakes, and what they write will be less relevant. And if they write too little, they don't cover enough range of language, and they don't cover enough content. And they must use the words that appear there. Okay, so each of those 4 words must appear in what they write. Okay, so we want the word people, we want the word dispute, we want the word yesterday, and we want the word activities. Okay, and they need to put those words in. And that is also part of the task. So, in my family, there are 5 persons, 5 people who are, and that will deal with that one. Okay, yesterday, what we did yesterday. Okay, what I did yesterday with my family, something about an argument, something about an activity. Now, those words could appear in the same sentence, they could appear in separate sentences. It's absolutely up to the students to decide how they do that. And so if they say, yesterday I had an argument with my sister, that's absolutely fine, because the requirement to include the words is met. And what we shouldn't expect students to do is to manipulate those words either. So if it says activities, we are looking for a plural, for example. Okay. Now, in terms of marking, if we look at communication and just sort of taking you back, there are 10 marks for this question, only 10 marks out of the 40 that are available. So the question is marked for firstly for communication and content, So if we look at the 5-mark box there, detailed and fully relevant response to the task, shows clear ability to express ideas and opinions and to describe or inform as appropriate to the task, coherent with logical flow and sequence of ideas. Now, we are only looking for 60 to 75 words, and so it's important that we've included those words. Lots of students like to put those words into a separate sentence or a separate little set of ideas, but there is no set way to deal with this. Students can deal with it in whichever way they would like to do it. But make sure that your students are aware of the mark scheme, detailed and fully relevant response to the task. The task is about family. So if a candidate suddenly writes about holidays or about school, that's not fully relevant. Okay, so the whole of everything they write needs to be relevant to the topic of family. Okay. Shows clear ability to express ideas and opinions and to describe or inform as appropriate to the task. So we're maybe looking for some ideas. We're looking for a good idea for them to include an opinion. Description, it's a good idea to include some short description. The people in the family, they might want to describe very briefly a member of their family, and so on and so forth. And we're also looking for coherent with a logical flow and sequence of ideas. Okay, so that sort of coherence, it should read quite naturally and normally. But there are only 5 marks, so provided they meet those criteria, those 5 marks can be available to them. And then secondly, that task is marked for linguistic knowledge and accuracy. And so for the 5 marks, the candidate uses a range of vocabulary and grammatical structures. We noticed in the text that the word yesterday was mentioned, so that should elicit a response using some simple past tense. Okay, so in whichever language you're teaching, and also that we've got that sort of range of vocabulary, that it's not overly repetitive, and I think this is kind of quite important in terms of range of vocabulary and structures. You know, if the candidate is using past tense and they just say, I went, I went, I went, I went, I went, actually we don't have the range. So we've shown that we can maybe use that grammatical structure to deal with a simple past idea, but actually we don't have the range. And so in common really with the question 7, developing that range through maybe using some different verbs and also different persons of the verb across some different time frames is important. Good idea maybe sometimes for them to talk about themselves and somebody else. Okay, me and somebody else, and then we know that they've used some first person and they've used some probably third person, and we can use first person singular and plural as well, myself and us. So think about those things and also just encourage them to use a range of verbs. However, this is question 6, so the scope for that range is much more limited than it will be when we get into question 7. And so language is manipulated to produce fluent sentences. So that means that the sentences read quite well, and it's very accurate, only with isolated minor errors, for example, spellings, genders, and agreements. And sometimes people ask questions about, you know, what we mean by a minor error and what we mean by a major error. And really, a minor error is one of those things that if you are a native speaker of the language, you can read and understand instantly what the person means, but there are just some mistakes. And so, for example, a mistake with a gender doesn't stop a French person from understanding what that that means. Okay, so if we've got a le instead where we should have la, well, okay, but you can still understand. So that counts as a minor error. It doesn't impede communication. But a major error is one of those things where really a native speaker reading it would kind of stop and think and not really understand. And a major error is the sort of thing where we're not clear whether a verb refers to the first person or the third person, and this kind of thing. So we have things that are not clearly expressed. And sometimes a major error is something like putting is where we should have are, because that generates an element of confusion, and is inaccurate on a level where it stops the person from actually understanding. Now I can see some things just appearing in the chat. Okay, so a few. This is interesting because I just yes. Okay. So a couple of things then. Let's just pick up on two of these. So what if they use a noun in the singular but the prompt is plural? That they should use the word Anna as they should use it as it appears. Now, I have the question about dispute, because dispute in this case could be a noun, and it could also be used as a verb, and that would be fine. Okay, but what they should do is aim to use that in the form that it appears. Personally, if I were training students to do it, I would also train them to underline the word in what they write, because I think that helps the examiner. But we don't insist on that. We can't insist that they do that. But I personally would encourage them to do that, and I think that would be a useful thing. Okay. Now, on Tuesday, so Alexandria is asking whether on Tuesday we said that the forwards have to equal amount of words written on it. It's quite a good strategy to teach them in that way, but the only requirement is that they include the four words. So sometimes a candidate will include all four words in one sentence. But sometimes I think if I were teaching them, I would try to encourage them. It's sort of 60 to 75 words, depending on the language, and to sort of divide what they say into four and try and use each of those four words in a separate sentence is quite good. But there isn't a reason not to put them all in the same sentence if they want to. If one of the verbs is a verb infinitive, does it count if they can't? I think they should keep it as an infinitive. I think to be on the safe side, really, they should use it as it appears there. But the principal examiner will think about those things. I think what they are told is that they must use those words, and I think they should stick to that. And I think that's what they need to do. And typically they seem to be, from the papers that I've looked at, they're either nouns or adjectives adverbial, so that they tend to be things that you can use quite easily without any manipulation. So best advice really is stick to those words. Yes, so I think we've dealt with most of those. Yes. Okay. People are asking, saying, you know, you've asked this question, had a different answer before. That they are told that they should use the words above, and I think what they should do is to use the words above. What I can't tell you is privately because I don't know the answer to this. It would be a confidential matter. How much an examiner would penalize slight changes in those words. But please, from the point of view of your students, just train them to use the words as they appear. And if you do that, you definitely can't go wrong. Okay. And we don't want to put the examiners in the position of having to make difficult choices. So I can't promise you what an examiner will do, but what I can tell you is what instruction to the candidate is use those words, and they should use those words as they appear. And if they do that, they're definitely okay, and that's definitely on that 5 marks, detailed and fully relevant. It's fully relevant to the task because that's what the task says. Okay. And so here we've got exactly what we were talking about. Okay. And as I mentioned, the candidate has used underlined those words. Okay. And so we've sort of got those fitted in into the amount of language that they use. And as you can see, that actually we've interpreted the dispute as a verb, but however you could do it, that would be absolutely fine. And not specifically 4 words into 4 sentences, but it's just made a piece of coherent writing. And hopefully that kind of gives you some clarity. And again, there will be exemplars for Spanish and German on the website. And what were we told in the commentary? This is the sort of note from the examiner, and this is the sort of thing that you can expect. The candidate was awarded 10 out of 10, 5 marks for communication, 5 for linguistic knowledge and accuracy, because it's clear and coherent. All 4 stimulus words are included appropriately. There's detail, and the ideas and opinions were clear. Good range of vocabulary and structures. The writing is accurate with minor errors. Language is fluent and it reads well. Candidate has underlined the 4 stimulus words. That's, as I mentioned, that's good practice because it helps them make sure that they haven't left any out. Let's just, however, clarify and talk about the sort of outcomes that we're talking about. This is a task that's aimed at grades 1 to 4. So candidates are not expected to produce an extended piece of writing using complex language. The 4 stimulus words, here we've got it, must be used verbatim, so exactly as they appear. The skill with this question is to be able to manipulate sentences so that the words fit in appropriately. The stimulus words themselves should not be changed in any way. Okay, so that absolutely clarifies the point that I was making earlier. Now we're going to move on, and we're going to have a think about question 7 now. So candidates here have a choice of question, and they are told choose one of the following questions, A, B, and C, A, B, or C, and write between 130 and 150 words in French. So they are given in each case an instruction. Okay. First one says, write an email to a friend about your birthday. Second one, write an article about media. And the third one, write a blog about traditions. So each of those tasks targets a different purpose. But provided what the students produce is apparently appropriate for that purpose, that will be absolutely fine. But it's worth just sort of mentioning that clearly the email to a friend will tend to have a more informal structure, but and in terms of kind of the grammar and the language that the students produce, the article about media might be a little bit more formal. And the kind of blog could be semi-formal. So they have that choice to make. And they're also told in each case, you must mention the following points. And notice that tu dois, the must is in bold. So they must cover all of those 4 points. And this is where I think it's good practice as well that students cover those points more or less equally, 35 to 40 words about each of those 4 points. Let's have a look at B, for example. What you like to listen to on the radio. So we're looking for opinions. personal opinion here. Advantages and disadvantages of having a TV in your room. What you watched on TV recently, and how the media might be used in the future. Okay. So we've got opinion, personal opinion, if you like. We've got a sort of conceptual opinion about a subject. We've got past and we've got future. Okay. If we look at C, write a blog about traditions, you must mention the following points. What you do during your favorite traditional celebration. Describe a traditional dish that you ate during a celebration. If traditions are always important these days, and how one might keep traditions alive in the future. So what you will notice is that the elements of the task are always going to be similar. So we've got sort of personal experience, we've got a view about a topic, we've got past and we've got future, but they don't necessarily appear in the bullet points in the same order. Now, students can choose as they write to write about those bullet points in whatever order they want to write about them. So they're not required always to go in that order, but they might appear in a different order in the bullet points that appear. So what they're looking for is personal experience, personal view, if you like, a wider view, past and a future. So one of the things that the students really need to do before they start this task is to identify within the bullet points, particularly the time frame that they need to be writing about that particular issue in. Okay. So train them as well. Okay, we're looking, can we spot the tense? Okay, can we spot the words that support that tense, that time frame, things like recently and in the future? Okay, so some work with your students just to make sure that they can analyze those questions is really useful. What I will mention as well is that obviously we're several years into the specification, so there are past papers that you can work on. But if you're a French teacher, and given how easily online translators and things work these days, nothing would prevent you from maybe taking a German paper and translating it into French. Okay, so if you're wanting some more ideas for these questions, you can take them from the other languages because the model will be the same. So in terms of what marks are given, okay, so it's important that the candidates refer to each of those four things. Now, they don't need to do it equally and evenly. That isn't an absolute requirement, but it is probably quite good practice because each of those bullet points takes the candidate into a different area of language, a different area of vocabulary, and also different areas of grammar. So where we're talking about things like using a past time frame, what you watched on the telly recently. So they can say, I watched, but they might say it was. And in the program, there were two people who. And so if we think about that demonstration of the use of that time frame, we might want to use different persons of the verb. We might want to think about using a range of different verbs. And we might also want to think about using different past tenses, because it might be useful to use, for example, a simple past and an imperfect, and we might even use things like pluperfect if candidates can go there. So in terms of sort of developing that range, important that they identify the time frame, but also thinking about the range of language that sits within that each of those bullet points. And you can see what you watched on telly recently, what you watched on, if they say yesterday I watched, on Tuesday I watched, on last week I watched, last year I watched, actually all we're getting is I watched, and we're not actually demonstrating much beyond the sort of simple use of that verb. So think about the range, and think about encouraging students within each of those bullet points to deal with the particular range of language. Let's have a look. I can see things. So I can just kind of picking up on a few things that have kind of appeared in the chat now. Is uneven coverage acceptable? Yes, it is acceptable. Everything is marked according to the mark scheme and according to the grid. But as I sort of was mentioning to you, really, in order to demonstrate the range of language globally, the more even the coverage, really, the better, because each of those bullet points focuses on a different area of vocabulary and suggests a sort of different area of grammar. Okay, so if they follow the bullet points, I mean, best advice as a sort of teacher is you would teach them to follow the bullet points and to vary what they say within each of those bullet points, and not to keep repeating themselves, and avoid repetition. And that's a sort of a good way to go. Questions about spelling mistakes and masculine and feminine gender are appearing as well. So masculine and feminine gender, well, that's all part and parcel of the minor errors that appear in the mark scheme, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. There's a question about what the picture's for. Well, actually, the picture is just a stimulus, really. The picture is just to provide a bit of kind of stimulus for ideas. So they don't need to make any reference to the picture. It just sort of provides a sort of visual image, and that's absolutely fine. But there isn't any reason they don't. You know, I watch the television with my sister, like the people in the picture. That would be fine. A question. So Nick is asking a question about if what the candidate produces is too short. We don't specifically take off marks, but they are part of the task is that they have to write 130 to 150 words. So it's unlikely that they would fairly come into the top mark boxes, into the best mark boxes, if they don't follow that guidance. But we don't specifically have a number of marks that we take off, and examiners will not actually count the words in any particular detail. We're not concerned with that. We mark what comes in front of us, but best advice is that the students produce, and as I sort of said, if you're kind of working around about 35 words or so for each of those 4 bullet points, you're about right, aren't you? And that means that each of those bullet points is developed, reasonably developed, and shows a reasonable range of language and vocab. Okay. Right, let's move on a little bit, and let's have a look at the mark scheme then. So this will kind of pick up on some of the questions people are asking. So again, we're marking for communication and content, and for linguistic knowledge and accuracy. So for 9 to 10 marks, the response shows an excellent ability to express ideas in a logical sequence, and errors do not interfere with comprehension for a sympathetic native speaker. And the response is entirely coherent, and while there may be minor ambiguities or digression from the theme, the response is confident, fluent, pertinent, and purposeful. So we're looking for a range of ideas. We're looking for logical sequence and sequencing. Okay, so perhaps you might want to think about how you teach your students to deal with sequencing and putting ideas together. And we're also told that errors don't interfere with comprehension for a sympathetic native speaker. So although the errors are part of the linguistic knowledge and accuracy mark scheme, it will still be something that a sympathetic native speaker can read and understand without any difficulty. And the response is entirely coherent. So there might be some minor ambiguities, might be digress, they might digress a little bit, but generally speaking, it's on topic and it's clearly answering each of the bullet points that are set. And it has that sort of sense of being confident, fluent, pertinent, and purposeful. Keep in mind, this is at a level appropriate for international GCSE. So we're sort of talking about kind of a B2 level at the top end, aren't we, in terms of the Common European Framework for Reference. So we're not asking students to produce highly philosophical ideas, but there are ideas there. And the linguistic knowledge and accuracy, so for 9 to 10 marks, we're looking at an excellent range of vocabulary and grammatical structures and secure use of at least 3 tenses. Okay, so past, present, and future. And that thing that, you know, we talk about secure use, that secure use might mean that, you know, we're showing, as I said, range of different verbs, some regular, some irregular, that we're showing a range of different persons, and that also we might be using different tenses within the same time frame, so that we've got simple past and imperfect, that we might have a sort of a simple future, and we might have a conditional included in there, or we might have some sort of periphrastic future if your language uses I am going to and I will. Okay, and similarly with present tense, if it's Spanish, we might want to see simple present tense, but we might want to see a continuous present as well. So appropriate to the language, but that sort of secure use of different tenses and time frames is important. And that it also includes some complex lexical items, so some slightly some vocabulary that is not the most obvious and high frequency vocabulary there, and that again that is sort of useful to encourage students to think about that. And sometimes you can develop those lexical items around all the sort of familiar topics that you teach, that maybe you teach things like food and drink, but it doesn't always need to be chicken and pizza and Coca-Cola and water, because they could eat and drink some different things. So making sure that your students have got a few things there that they might like to sort of include there, just to demonstrate that they have those sort of complex lexical items, and they can have their little personal repertoire of sort of nice vocabulary. And sometimes that's also encouraging them to think in a different context. So if you think about holidays, and they always talk about a beach holiday, but okay, so if we did a mountain climbing holiday, what sort of vocabulary could we have there? And we only need a few of those things, because in each case we're only talking about writing 35 words or so about each of those bullet points, but it's useful to encourage them to do that. If they're talking about school, for example, they might think about what they want to study next year, and that might include topics like business, you know, things like business studies or economics that wouldn't necessarily be part of their current education. So even as simple as that, just I don't always learn maths and French and English, but you might want to learn philosophy and economics and archaeology or whatever. So just making sure that they've got those things. And also the thing that I mentioned about no noticeable repetition, it isn't always I went, I went, I went, I went. Okay, so we're sort of varying that vocabulary. Very strong evidence of correct spelling, verb formation, gender, and agreement. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't overlook occasional minor errors. That's kind of part and parcel. But if we're talking about sort of verb formation, for example, and we're talking about verb formation in a simple past tense, if a candidate has written, and they're perhaps 3 or possibly 4 examples of verbs that are produced correctly in that tense, and one where they make a small error, we've got evidence that they know how to use that tense, but just with a tiny error. So that would count as very strong evidence. However, if they get it right once and wrong 4 times, we don't have that very strong evidence. We would only have perhaps in that 3 to 4 band occasional evidence. With all of these banded mark schemes, examiners also will use a best fit approach. So actually, if there's a good range of vocabulary and structures and so on, but what we're seeing is quite a number of problems with spelling, but they're quite minor problems with spelling. That probably still could sit in the 9 box. It wouldn't maybe get the 10. If it's only that we have some sort of spelling problems with difficult words, and that's things typically in French where maybe you get the double letters are wrong, and so, but very often you can understand the word perfectly well. So it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect for the 10 marks. Okay. And we have an example there. We'll just give you just a moment if you'd like to have a look and have a read at that example. Okay. Continues. She thought it hadn't quite dealt with the future. And we sort of see the example. Now, just this is also from a sort of demonstration of what you will get from Results Plus that we talked about last time, that will enable you to see what your candidates actually did. Scores 20 out of 20, this response. One thing that's worth mentioning about those responses that score full marks is that sometimes they go even beyond the requirement for that full mark. So that was a really excellent example that we saw. The candidate provides, we're told, in-depth information pertinent to the question and subject, including extended sequences of writing. Linguistically, the candidate has skillfully employed a range of grammatical structures, incorporating some complex constructions, and has successfully referred to past, present, and future time frames. Okay, so that was a 10 out of 10 on both of the 2 mark grids. Okay, so now I want to just move on. Now we're going to have a look at question 8, and question 8 is the grammar test. So candidates are given a topic, so they know what they're going to talk about. They are told to change the words A to J, and they must respect the sense of the phrase. Be careful, it's not always necessary to change the words. So they need to look at each of the 10 words. In each case, those words are either adjectives or they're verbs. Okay. They may sometimes need to think about the time frame of of the verb. Okay. And you will see if you just read through how that task works. So, strategies that we're teaching our students. Okay. First one is probably to think which are the verbs and which are the adjectives. So look very carefully, which are the verbs and which are the adjectives. When we're looking at the verbs, we need to look at the whole sentence for evidence of the required time frame. So it starts, at the moment, the pupils in my village do not to go to school. Okay, so we've identified, at the moment, we've identified from that word the present tense, that we need a present tense. We then need to look for the subject of that verb. Okay, and the subject of that verb is the pupils. So we need to identify that as a third person plural. And then we need to look at that verb and we need to decide, is that a regular or an irregular verb? Okay. And if it's, in this case, it's an irregular verb. And so we should then think, okay, what is the paradigm for that verb? And vont is going to be the word that will fit in there in order to make that whole sentence make sense. So again, with your students, it's sort of the thinking strategy. Okay, so what's thinking about what the time frame is, what's the evidence in the sentence for the time frame that I'm looking for, that gives me the tense that I might need to deal with. And then we think about the subject of the verb. What's the subject of the verb? And we find that, is it singular, is it plural, what is it? And is the verb regular or irregular? And therefore, what is the paradigm and the pattern? And what do I need to put in there? Okay. And then as we read through, we look at B, and we've got last year. Okay, so what does that tell us? That tells us that we're talking about past tense. Okay, and we've got a they. So again, we've got that third person plural. And we are therefore expecting that we're going to do some sort of past time frame with commencer, and then we need to think, is commencer regular or irregular? What's the pattern, and how do I follow that? And then the same approach really with the adjectives. The adjectives sometimes will change and sometimes will not change. Okay. And the verbs also, sometimes it may be possible to keep it as an infinitive, and sometimes it isn't. Okay, so just teaching your students to sort of analyze those. So it's an interesting question that we're getting about whether you could change those things, and you shouldn't. No, you should be looking just as the approach that I'm suggesting. Identify the time frame, identify the subject, then look at the verb, is it regular or is it irregular, and just use that verb or that adjective. Okay, we shouldn't be expecting any kind of manipulation. And this is quite important if you have native speaker candidates who might think, oh, I could find a clever way to do that. The test is a grammar test. It's in this particular example, can you manipulate aller in the present tense, and can you find that? So that's the test, and that's what we need them to do. Okay, now we've got a question about sort of simple future and periphrastic future, if you like. Yes, if there is, that would be acceptable, provided it makes sense and it's clear and unambiguous. It doesn't make any difference. So we're not absolutely insisting on one particular future tense. And that's a decision that the principal examiner will make when the paper is standardized. But again, in line with the sort of positive marking approach, it may not appear on the mark scheme, but it's provided it meets the criteria for producing a future and it works in the context of the sentence, that will be fine. We may even sometimes find, you know, that we're looking for a simple past, but actually, you know, a pluperfect or an imperfect tense could equally well fit into that sentence. You could argue a case, and the principal examiners will be very likely to accept those things, because I think it's sort of important that we mark positively. So provided what they've written fits, that's absolutely fine. Yeah. Okay, let's have a look a little bit further forward, and we're looking there at the mark scheme, and that's exactly the thing that we had, but actually that in I there, probably that would be absolutely fine. And as I mentioned, not every possible correct answer can always be can always appear on the mark scheme. Okay, so provided it works and it fits and it makes sense and it's unambiguous, those will be accepted. And there we've got an example of some candidate work and what the candidate needed to do. Okay, and we're given some information. Okay. Right, now let's have a look. I want to move on now really to talk about speaking. So paper 3 is the speaking test, and it's a 40-mark paper, and it lasts 8 to 10 minutes of actual speaking time. So just going through now to sort of explain to you what it is the candidates need to do. Task A, the candidates respond to questions on a picture of their choice. And in tasks B and C, candidates take part in a spontaneous discussion. So the timings are 2 to 3 minutes for the picture task, and then 3 to 3.5 minutes for each of task B and task C. Okay. So if we just have a think now about the picture-based discussion, because this is an area where teachers will need to do a little bit of work and a little bit of preparation. So the teacher must ask candidates 5 questions plus allowed prompts. And there are 5 types of questioning which the teacher examiner must cover in the order given. Teacher examiners must ensure they ask 1 question from each type. Okay, so this is important. You need to ask a question which is a description of what's in the picture. So tell me what's in the picture. Okay, so the candidates need to describe the picture. And then you need to ask for some specific factual information about the picture. Okay, so what is the boy holding? What is the man doing? Okay, so specific factual information that comes from the picture. And ideally, something that the candidate hasn't already said in their description. So you need to listen carefully. And then we need to elicit a past or future time frame. So we need to ask the candidate for a past or future hypothesis. What do you think these people did before they arrived at the restaurant? If it's a picture of people in a restaurant. Or what do you think they're going to do next? Okay, so we're going to ask that past or future. Where did they go? Where have they been? And where will they go next? Okay. What happened before this picture, or what's going to happen after this picture? Okay, so it's a past or future hypothesis the candidate is expected to respond to, but just one or the other. We don't need to do both. And then we need opinions about the picture. So what do you think of and think about the thing that's happening in the picture. If the picture is about maybe people playing football, what do you think team sports are important? Okay. So what do you think about that? And then that evaluative one that goes a little bit deeper. So opinions about the picture. Do you think it's do you think those people are going to win? What do you think about eating in restaurants? And then an evaluative one which goes a little bit wider. Maybe if it's a picture about football, do you think sport is really important for young people? Okay, so something where they can expand slightly away from the content of the picture, but in the direction of the ideas that the picture might sort of prompt in them. So the following 3 prompts can be used in the target language. So why not, anything else, and is that all? But you shouldn't ask any supplementary questions. You can repeat the question if they didn't understand it, but don't change it. Just repeat the question that you asked. Keep the level of the language of your questions accessible based on your knowledge of the candidate as well. Okay, so we don't want candidates to struggle to understand your question. So keep the language nice and simple there, because the test is what they say, not their understanding of what you say, if you see what I mean. So they are expected to take your question and use that as a springboard for their answer. And with the prompts, you mustn't deviate from those prompts. So you're just allowed to use the prompts appropriate to the language that you're teaching. Now, for task A then, the marking grid looks as follows. And for 7 to 8 marks, the candidate responds to questions with consistently fluent and developed responses. There's consistently effective adaptation of language to describe, narrate, and inform in response to the questions. And we're looking for those things. Describe what's in the picture, but narrate, what did the people do before, or what are they going to do afterwards? So telling a little story, okay? Inform and so on in response to the questions. And the candidate also expresses opinions with ease and gives a fully developed justification. And pronunciation and intonation are consistently accurate and intelligible. Not necessarily perfect, but a sympathetic native speaker of that language would have no difficulty in understanding. And then the task is also marked for linguistic knowledge and accuracy. So consistently accurate grammatical structures, successful references to past, present, and or future events in response to the questions. And keep in mind, we're only insisting on 2 time frames, present and either past or future with this, because remember that question about the past or future hypothesis was either or. So we don't need 3 time frames. Some candidates will give you that, but you shouldn't ask. You should either ask present tense questions, think about questions that can be answered in the present, and then either past or future. But if candidates produce more, that's fine, because that's their response to your question. But your questioning should focus there, and particularly think about that evaluation question. What do you think about the wider issue of type question? Again, could however they respond is absolutely fine, but your question shouldn't naturally take them into past or future. What do you think the future of the environment will be, kind of thing. We don't want to go there. We want them just to say, you know, do you think the environment is important for you? Do you think we need to look after the environment better, or whatever? Okay. And we're also looking for responses that are fully coherent, and so any errors don't hinder the clarity of communication. So it doesn't mean that they can't make errors, it doesn't need to be perfect, but it is generally clear. Okay, so just thinking about the sort of activities and task A. We're going to play a recording in a moment for task A based on this picture below. So first of all, I want to just sort of think about, is the picture appropriate? Does the teacher examiner ask the 5 types of question? And does the teacher examiner use only the allowed prompts? Okay, so is the picture appropriate? Okay, so you say, well, yeah, I think there's plenty going on in the picture. Listen to the questions that the teacher examiner asks, and also think about those prompts. I'm going to just stop sharing that for a moment, and we'll hopefully go into just the sound file. And apologies that we are into a Spanish into a French sound file, but hopefully.
This is the Pearson edXL International GCSE Listening Comprehension Test in French, Summer 2023. You have 5 minutes to read through the question paper. You may make notes at any time. You may open your question paper now.
I don't think this is the correct sound file. I apologize, because I think this is a... Give me just a moment. Let me see if we can find the right... Well, I do apologize. I think we don't have the right... We don't have... I don't have the right... the correct sound file there. No matter, we will continue, and I'll just sort of talk you through what you should have heard. So first of all, in terms of the picture, is the picture appropriate? Does the teacher examiner ask the 5 types of question, and does the teacher examiner use only the prompts? Well, what we can say is that the picture is appropriate because it includes people, it includes activities, and there's a location that the students can describe. And the prompts that are asked by the teacher, you would hear, if you dip into the website and listen to this one, you'll be able to see it. And the questions are appropriate. So the candidate is asked to describe the picture. There are some specific details about the picture. They're asked a past hypothesis. And then they're asked to give their opinion about the picture. So do you think this is a good place to get married, for example, might be a question there. And then they can be asked an evaluative question about that picture. Okay, and unfortunately we didn't have it to listen to, but the task was correctly conducted. The teacher examiner asked the 5 questions, 1 from each type, and the candidate that we unfortunately weren't able to hear responded well. Okay, so let's just have a look now, and we'll move on. We'll talk about the questions for tasks B and C, those conversation questions. So the teacher examiner uses a randomization grid provided by Pearson to determine which topic is to be examined in task B conversation 1 and task C conversation 2. And teacher examiners don't choose the topics for the 2 conversations. So those 2 conversations are chosen by Pearson, and they are set by Pearson, and they work on that randomization grid. Now, in terms of your approach to questioning, try to ask, at least at the beginning of a line of questioning, open questions. Tell me about, explain, why do you think? Okay, because we're not wanting to pin the candidates down into a particular area of vocabulary where they may not know the word, or a particular line of questioning where they may not know the answer. So tell me about, explain why, what do you think of, what's your opinion of? Those kinds of open questions are important. Ask questions at a level appropriate to the candidate's ability. Now, keep in mind, you're going to have candidates from grade 1 up to grade 9. You will have a good sense of their ability. And what you're aiming to do as the teacher examiner is to demonstrate the ceiling of their ability to the examiner who is marking the candidate's work. So they won't, the examiner who's marking will just listen and mark based on what they hear. But you should target your questions to demonstrate the ceiling of that candidate's ability. So if you've got a really able candidate, you might ask a shorter number of questions, you might develop them more, you might ask some questions in greater depth, and that encourage them to use a greater range of structures and vocabulary. If you've got a weaker candidate, they may need to have lots of simple factual questions. And that's okay, because what we're wanting to do is to maintain the candidate's confidence through the two parts of the conversation, to demonstrate their performance. But we also don't want a lot of time where you ask a question, a difficult question to a weak.
In a few moments, you will hear the first recorded extract in French.
I don't know what's.
You will hear each extract twice.
Sorry, I'm.
After the first playing of the extract, you will hear one.
I don't know.
After the second playing of the extract, you will hear two bleeps.
Apologies. Oh dear. Right. Right. Okay. So you need to ask these open questions then. Questions, as I said, at the level of the candidate's ability. You need to link the questions as well to the previous response where possible. And this is really important too, because one of the things that will quite often happen is that the conversation ceases to be a conversation if it's a set of random questions that candidates have prepared in advance. So make sure that the conversation has, as far as we possibly can, a natural flow. You need to elicit a range of tenses and structures and vocabulary, elicit opinions and justifications, and provide candidates with an opportunity to expand. Important that you respect the timings. Task B and Task C should not exceed 7 minutes, and examiners will stop listening at that point, so you don't do the candidates any favour by exceeding that time period. It's the same as when they sit and examine the hall. They have the hour and 45 minutes to do paper 2, and so the time is absolutely critical. And again, now onto our marking and our mark grids. In the 10 to 12 box for communication and content, we're looking for communicates detailed information relevant to the topics and questions, consistently uses language creatively to express and justify a wide variety of individual thoughts, consistently uses a wide variety of vocabulary, including uncommon language. And by uncommon language, that's just the things that I mentioned earlier about we don't always need to eat pizza and chicken. We could eat seafood and artichokes and that sort of thing. So just making sure that they've got some kind of a personal repertoire of some uncommon vocabulary so that we're showing that range. And also that pronunciation and intonation are consistently accurate and intelligible. And then for the marks for linguistic, there are also then now marks for interaction and spontaneity. Now, this is important because, you know, what I said about we don't want a list of pre-learned questions and answers. There are marks for spontaneity, and so you must try as you're examining to ensure that there are opportunities for spontaneity. We know that students will have pre-learned a certain amount of information, but it's important that you might ask them why, or what color was that, or can you tell me a bit more about that, in order to demonstrate that what they're doing is spontaneous. So respond spontaneously and with ease to questions, natural interaction, consistently able to initiate and develop the conversation independently, and able to sustain communication throughout using rephrasing, repair strategies, and if necessary to continue the flow. Okay. And the marking grid also rewards linguistic knowledge and accuracy at the same level that it rewards spontaneity. So the candidate manipulates a wide variety of grammatical structures with frequent use of complex structures. Their consistently accurate use of grammatical structures, consistently successful references to past, present, and future, and fully coherent speech, and any errors don't hinder the clarity of the communication. So much the same as we saw earlier on for the picture task there. Okay, and again, you see there are examples now of examiners' commentary and reports, and those are available for French, Spanish, and German through the website, as are the exemplars that you might like to use and work with. Now, a few things really just to say about preparing students for exams. If you haven't used walking, talking mocks, they're a good tool. So we'd sit students in the same exam room where they're going to do their exam. They're given the exam paper, you talk them through the strategies and approaches for each question, and then you get them to answer the question. So a useful way really to think about preparing students for the actual technique of the exams. Now, I mentioned much of the support when we spoke on Tuesday, so keep in mind that we support you at each stage. All of those things are available there, and they support you at the planning and teaching, exam prep, and also at the results support stage. Remind you about the specifications and information on the website, so do explore that well. I'll remind you too about Results Plus, which gives you that opportunity to find a detailed breakdown of your own students' performance and look at what they actually did in the exams. And also Exam Wizard, that enables you to pull together questions from different exam papers to construct your own assessments. And you do have that access to script via the online portal. So again, you're able to show, we're able to see that your actual candidates work with their actual mark, and use that as a sort of springboard for your own development and progress. We'll mention also Pearson Publishing, that the textbooks are available, although you could use other textbooks. You're not required to use our textbooks to deliver the specification, but they are very carefully designed to enable that progression through. And again, I think we talked about those on Tuesday. And also just to mention to you, our subject advisor is Rebecca Waker, and she is able to answer any of your queries via that teachinglanguages@pearson.com or on that phone number. So do contact her for anything really that you want to know in terms of technical information, or indeed to contact your regional sales team if you want a subject textbook representative to contact you. You can do all of that and find out all of that information via Rebecca and her team. Okay, now let's just have a look at any kind of questions that that cropped up. So we've So can the teacher ask students to submit their picture before the, yes, you need to see their picture. Yes. So 2 weeks before the exam, they should give you a copy of their picture so that you can prepare. And you maybe want to think about the questions that you want to ask about those things, because you need to pick some details, but you will also need to respond to what they've said in their description of the picture, because when you ask them a detail about the picture, we don't want them to repeat the same thing, but you will need to have a copy of it, I think. Some students like to do it with Photoshop, and put all sorts of things into the picture. So there are creative approaches to do. Anna, apologies that we didn't have the recording ready, and I do apologise for that. And it was not my at my end, I'm afraid. It appeared there and then wasn't the correct one when it appeared. Just to double check, do students find out which 2 topics they're covering in the exam room? Yes, that's a spontaneous response. So you're going to say to them, okay, we're now going to move on and we're going to talk about this. Okay, so thank you for your picture. Thank you for talking about your picture. We're now going to talk about this. So they don't have any advanced knowledge of the topics for B and C. Okay. We'll send everything over to you. I do apologise that the recording wasn't available. They are available on the website, and actually we are pushed for time as it is. So I think at this point we probably do need to kind of wrap up and say thank you for your time again this morning. And I apologize again that we didn't have that ready, but do please go to the website, because those things are all there, and they're there in French, Spanish, and German as well. So I'll say a thank you now for spending this couple of hours with you, and we hope it's been of some help, although we've covered an awful lot of material in the time. Thank you.